Did best practices in simulation in May. And Jill Wall is not available today, so we'll hear from these two. So thank you very much.
This is my favorite thing to do, by the way. So like Judy said, Jill, Bruce, and I went to the Best Practices in Simulation Conference back in May. The focus of the conference was to help develop simulation skills to utilize for teaching. It was primarily attended by nurse educators throughout the state of Minnesota as well as surrounding states. There were a few people, I think, from Iowa and the Dakotas there that we talked to as well. And then a few members from industry, like the three of us were there, but I think it was largely attended by nurse educators. The driving factor for the conference was actually these recent changes, December of 2016, that were implemented by the Minnesota Board of Nursing. The change that they made was that they're now going to allow up to 50% of a nursing student's clinical hours come from simulation. So prior to that, many of you guys are nurses, so you already have had to experience clinicals anyway, but when you go through your clinical experience, before that they did have the requirement that nursing programs had to have some degree of simulation in the programs, but they weren't allowed to substitute simulation time for some of the required clinical hours. And the change as of December of 16, they're now able to use that simulation time for up to 50% of the clinical hours. So this is causing a large change with many of the nursing programs who are all looking at growing their simulation labs and really enhancing their simulation programs. Hence the reason for the conference, to try and give everyone the tools and the resource that they need in order to do that. So what led to the change with the Board of Nursing was this large research study that was conducted and concluded in 2014. And the results of that study were that they found that simulation experiences are just as, if not more effective as a learning method than direct clinical rotations for students. So the benefits that they found for simulation while they were doing this study is that students were able to practice skills, decision making, without real-time risk to patient safety. This means that when you're going through clinical rotations, which not a simulation, you have your instructor kind of hovering over you, making sure that you're not going to make a mistake, which would potentially cause harm or even death to your patient. And so a lot of times the instructor is then having to jump in before someone might make a mistake, or if the instructor is thinking that the student might be kind of going down the wrong path, it doesn't allow the student to use a lot of critical thinking sometimes. It also is going to provide students with immediate feedback. The feedback is going to come in the form of debrief. So whenever there's a simulation, there's going to be a debrief session held immediately afterward, which Bruce is going to talk a little bit about here in a minute. And it also allows the students to get consistent, standardized, and equitable learning experiences. So prior to being able to utilize simulation for clinical hours, nursing programs are getting their clinical sites at multiple different places. So even within one program, for example, and I know in HCN and IV we have nursing students that come to us as well, but we might have 5 or 10 of their students, and another 5 or 10 might go somewhere else. So they're getting different experiences, and even the 5 or 10 that might come to us for clinical rotation, no 2 days are the same. So even within that, they're getting different experiences and learning different things, and the ability to practice different skills. So by using simulation is going to be very consistent. Every single one of those students would be able to run through the same scenario, the same simulation, and have the exact same opportunities to learn and to practice the same skills. As part of this too, with the study, it was shown that simulation also improves critical thinking for students. It improves clinical reasoning and judgment, and also just increases their overall confidence with their skills. I'm going to turn it over to Bruce.
So I get to be Jill today as well, so I'll put my Jill face and my Bruce face and see if that works. The main thing about this is that it will bridge the gap. They learn and they practice. So, and they're able to practice in a controlled environment, but actually still learn what they're trying to do with the thing. So what we're talking about is a high fidelity is, you gotta make it feel like it is what they're doing, okay? That's one of the differences of what we hope to offer versus a clinical situation. If you go to any of the learning labs in the hospitals, it's gonna feel like a hospital. Our goal is to make it feel like a home. So make it feel and look and sound like that. That's the high fidelity part. The pre-brief, they need to know what they're getting into, no surprises. So that when they go into the lab, they know what the expectations are. And then the activity is the actual thing, the actual activity itself, which has to be well directed, meaning, and that goes back to the continuity that Becca was saying, that no matter who is the instructor, it's the same lesson. And then the debrief, this is where they learn. And I'll talk a little bit more about the debrief in a moment. Oops, that didn't work there. There we go, wrong button. Okay. Computer, there's different ways of doing high fidelity simulation. One is to use the mannequins, the little robot things that are computer generated, they're run by computers. They do all kinds of cool things. You can do virtual reality. Literally, you're putting on goggles and doing things, right? And working with the equipment, that's one option. And then there's actually using people, actors, to simulate the thing. Well, I don't really think we want to use an actor when we're trying to do a port access or anything like that. But they showed a video that was pretty cool where this nurse was doing a brief introduction, brief exam of this patient, right? And a guy. And then she had to leave the room, and when she came back in the room, they had switched the actor with a mannequin that had gone into arrest. The mannequin had the same clothing, the same hat and everything. So the nurse walks in and go, oh boy, what do I do now? And then, so there's a combination of that. Like I said, I don't think we'll be using the actor part of it on that. I'm sorry. It's really important, though, to have quality audio and visual recording, because that's going to be used in the pre-briefing where the actual learning occurs. So good quality IT information is good. Multiple angles, multiple views. All right, the scenarios, what are they really going to experience? We want to set up scenarios that are going to be what our kids do. Are they having an anaphylactic reaction to a medication? Do they have an obstructed trach? Those types of things. The location, well, the hospitals, their location for their simulation labs are hospital rooms. Well, we want to set it up as a child's bedroom and make it look like a real bedroom. And then the equipment and supplies, we're going to be using our home care equipment, not wall suction and wall oxygen and that kind of stuff in a hospital vent. We want to use our home vents and IV pumps and things like that. So the purpose of the pre-brief, get them ready to learn. All right, set the stage. What are they going to learn? What can they expect? And what are the scenario objectives? All right. They need to know what the room is like, so you don't just pop them in a room and say, this is it, right? You have to orient them to the mannequins, what they're going to be using. You have to make sure they understand the equipment and the medications that they're actually going to have available to them, and what is the scenario that they're going to be working on. Who's playing what role? Who's going to be the nurse or the respiratory therapist or the school lunch lady or that type of thing. So identify what roles people are going to be doing.
You ultimately want to set them up for success. That's the point of the debrief.
You definitely want to get them, you don't want to spring anything on them that they're not expecting. Okay? It's to teach them specific skills. Okay? Review the rules, again, same type of thing. What is expected? And they kind of stress this. If it's a skills assessment, they have to know that beforehand. Okay? If it's a learning experience, they have to know that. So if you're coming in for simulation, you don't have to worry about, oh my God, are they doing a skills test on me, or am I here to learn how to do whatever? And we can do it either way, but the participants absolutely have to know what their goal is for their lesson. Give the team members, might be one person, right? Or it might be a couple people that are going to be doing the simulation. Give them time to kind of talk about, this is what we're going to do, who's going to do what, kind of prepare and be ready. And then who are they going to call when they're in trouble? Are they going to have a simulation person teacher available? Or are they going to be behind a curtain? Or are they going to be, how are they going to, if they get stalled, what do they do about that? And how can they work through the process? Okay, so that's the activity. Continuity. That, as she stated, that if you do a lesson today, somebody else is going to get the exact same lesson tomorrow, right? So the instructors have to be on the same page, they have to know what they're doing and how to do it. So it does require a well-dedicated staff, not only to offer that continuity, but the equipment is very expensive. And we don't want people, or you don't want people coming in using a very expensive mannequin if they don't know how to handle that very expensive mannequin. One simulation lab we've toured, if you touched a mannequin, you had gloves on. They didn't let anybody touch a mannequin if you didn't have gloves on. That's how protective they were of their mannequins. We're not sure we're going to that level, but it's the kind of thing that we want. Not just anybody's going to come in and run a simulation. We need people well trained on how to do that. And then the debrief. The debrief is at least twice as long as the actual activity. So your activity might only be a 15-minute activity, but your debrief is going to be much longer than that, because that's where they learn. They want to know what did they do, and see or reflect on that. Let me explain. After they do an activity, you're in a room, a debriefing room. Might be in the same room that you did the activity, but it might be a separate room. And you say, okay, how'd you think you did? What do you think? How do you think you did with that, right? And they talk about that. And then say, okay, well, let's show you what really happened. So you show the video, and you're kind of guiding them through, this is what really happened. And then, how are you going to take this lesson and move it forward? What are you going to do in the future when you come across that? So those 3 levels of learning is where people retain what they're trying to do. That's how a good simulation is run. Prepare them for it, do the activity, and then have them watch themselves do the activity. And if the camera angles are just right, they realize they have a big bald spot on the back of their head. That's what I found out when I went into a simulation lab. I have a big bald spot back here. What are the goals? What are the goals for PHS High Fidelity Lab or the simulation lab? Train our new staff, okay? Continue training new staff, not only the HCNs, but our IV people, our respiratory people. There are specific skills that we can set up simulations for. It might be the annual competency that we do. It might be, okay, somebody's now ready to do something else, and so let's train them how to, maybe we can teach them how to sync a pH probe, in a simulation lab instead of having to do it in an OR at the UM type thing. So that's what we're going to do, continue learning. We want to continue to partner with nursing, select nursing schools, as not only so we have a better pool of people trained out there, but maybe as a recruiting tool for future employees, we hope. That's really one of our main, a very important driver for us, right? We also think we could use it for training families. Many of us have had to work with families that have had separated families where there's a non-custodial parent who is now being trained on how to prepare to take custody or joint custody of their child. Well, they can come into simulation lab and learn how to access a port. They can come into sim lab and learn how to do a trach change and all that fun stuff in a non-threatening and educational experience, right? Then we think we can use it for other activities, run it similar to what we're doing with our education plans for other nursing agencies, but there's other groups that have also expressed interest in a simulation lab to what we do. That EMS training, we could do a lot more with the EMS with some good mannequins, and we've even had some manufacturers say, gosh, we'd really like to try this new concept of a ventilator, and how's it going to work for the home environment. And then ultimately it becomes part of our long-term goal of becoming a center of excellence, because we are going to be known as the people who do a very good job of training people, not only our staff, but people outside our staff. So very quickly, as kind of a wrap up, that's what one of the mannequins looks like. Okay, I apologize, it's a little bit blurry. This is a tetherless unit, meaning it's not connected to anything. And it breathes on its own, it has a heart rate of its own, it can wiggle like a seizure or an anaphylactic episode, it has bowel sounds, has lung sounds, has a voice, it can cry or say words, has pupils that dilate and expand. We can control the blood pressure, we can control all these types of things to that. And so this is my part, I love that part, we can do a trach. We could do a trach change, and we can ventilate with a trach, okay? So there's just all kinds of things. Now, of course, they set it up for CPR training as well, so we could hook defibrillators and stuff. We have other mannequins we can use for CPR training, but it does offer some things we can do. And then this is kind of the control panel. So somebody behind the green curtain, right, the Wizard of Oz back there, that wizard can be doing things to make the patient, based on what they see in the camera, if the nurse or participant does this, they can make the mannequin do that. You know, they did the wrong thing, the mannequin takes a turn for the worse. They did the right thing, the scenario continues to move on. So there's many different ways we can control the mannequins. That is what we learned at the simulation lab. And it was very interesting, as just a tip of the iceberg of what we are learning at this point. At this point, questions? We have a little bit of time for questions before the next speakers, but this is the type of thing, she and I are going, all right, let's get this going, you know, but there's some planning that has to be done like that. A lot of writing on the simulations. They said you have to be very, very detailed on what the simulation's gonna be. The simulation might only be a 15-minute thing, it might be a lot longer, maybe even shorter, so. Yes?
Are we anticipating that we'll put in like a double room where there's a window that's soundproof so people can watch the simulation happening, or are we going to have video having like other people sit in another room and watch it on a screen?
That's a really good question. The plan right now is, if you come visit where my temporary office is, hopefully that's going to be our simulation lab. And that's going to be broken into two groups. Part of it's going to be one for a toddler age patient, and one's going to be for a pediatric patient, maybe like a curtain in between. It's going to look like a bedroom. It's going to have the mannequin, it's going to have the equipment, and it's going to have cameras. Okay, I have Brian working with us to help us identify cameras. That will go into a recording device that we have. And then and that's what the person running that computer screen does. After the simulation is done, then we either go into another room, say the HCN training room, or we pop up a screen and have the person right there see on a computer screen what they saw. And we saw some that have 4 different angles. So, you know, you have boom, 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 boom. You want to see this, and it gives a better view of what they were doing with their hands. So yeah, they're going to be, as soon as the activity is over, then they go into a debriefing session, which might be in the actual room that they did it in, or in a separate room with a table and things. Does that answer?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was also wondering too, like if other people would be able to. I know when I was in nursing school, we were able to watch the other people go through their scenarios because we learned also
It's possible.
watching other people make mistakes or do a good job. So I was wondering, are other people going to be able to visualize other students going through the scenario, or would it be afterwards that you'd use it?
I'm sure all the simulations can be recorded.
Yeah.
And then we can review them anytime. And we could also, with IT, I'm sure we could set up so that the computer screen in the HCN room would be able to show real time what's happening in that room, so you could have an audience in there. But the kicker is you don't want extra people in the simulation area. But yeah, we can, the technology is definitely available to do that. Either way, you record it for future reference or live stream to an audience. Yes, Judy?
There may be other opportunities for us to use some existing simulation centers, which are very sophisticated and offer those kinds of things if we were doing large groups. Say, for example, to everyone needed to do a competency of trade changes. So possibly Subcog or Payne, New County Medical Center, which has a huge simulation center, or Regions or Gillette, to use their simulation centers for things like that. So those are also an option for us.
Yes.
With that. Bruce, I was just going to ask, in terms of the development of simulations, did you guys spend any time looking at kind of a standardized format for creating those simulations?
We have seen a couple of different formats of how, you know, what's the goal, what's the objective, what's the task to be taught, and what's going to happen if this happens. But there are some very specific templates. The Minnesota Society for Simulation has some. I want to share with us, I can't remember the exact name of that. That's another format really interesting formats that has some discussion, maybe that's
So those would be
standard
to be determined.
what do the nursing schools have, what are the, you know, the formats that specific school wants us to use, or are we going to say, this is the format we use, and we'll let, with other groups. So it's, you're definitely, that comes with a continuity.
So exactly, that's, I know, having conversations on the workforce task force, the educators, the nursing school educators are very committed to the standardized format for not only hospital scenarios, but also for home care.
Yes.
So I just wondered, is there a method that we have to do to become certified to provide simulation in exchange for clinical experience?
At this point, there isn't like a standardized like template that the schools have been indicating. And what was interesting to me at the conference was that a lot of these programs, they've had very, very minimal simulation in their programs to this point. And so they were all there trying to figure out how is this working and how is this going to look. And there were a number of different ways that people were looking to kind of formulate their scenarios and writing their scenarios. And I think one or if not two of the sessions were to help guide people through writing scenarios. But even within that, it wasn't an expressed, like you have to do it this way or you have to follow this template. There was some fluidity.
So
to
there's
it.
some movement. Okay, great.
Right, everybody has a little bit different, it's kind of like a ventilator flow sheet. You know, for respiratory therapy talk, on a ventilator flow sheets, we know what we want to document on the flow sheet, but the order that is documented is a little bit different. Same thing with the templates or the scenarios. The information is the same, but how do we physically write it onto a document might be a little bit different. But what's really important is how you do it in the room. You know, so.
Right, I just was wondering if there was some expectation in terms of the schools and how we
There's
how
not
we qualify for the.
No, they, as she stated, each one has a little bit different template.
Yeah, thank you.
Other questions, comments? Stay tuned. Stay tuned and see what happens. Good, I'm done. Thank you.
Thanks, you guys.
Thanks. And then next, we have Jill Liebers. Are you guys going to individually do it? Jill and Lynn, who will be presenting information from one of my favorite conferences, which is the National Home Infusion Association.
Okay, well this is, like Judy said, this is actually probably my favorite conference. It seems like I come away with something every single year. It is a longer conference. It's probably 4.5, like completely packed days. You start at like 6 a.m. and you're going till 7:30, 8 o'clock at night, but it's just tons of information. So it was really hard for me to sit down and put together a 6 or 7 minute blurb on what I learned, but Lynn and Michelle and I kind of divided up topics so that we didn't cross paths either. So, my first one that I was interested in, obviously, being in the pharmacy world is, it was regarding specialty pharmacy distribution and just some interesting tidbits. And I think people are really confused, even when you're in the business, are we a specialty pharmacy? Different insurance companies determine different specialty drugs. So I would say yes, because when you look at the definition of a specialty drug, that is one that's high dollar, small patient population, special handling, special lab work, things like that. So a lot of the things that we do here at PHS and we have done for years does qualify for specialty pharmacy. So by 2018, specialty drugs will be approximately 50% of all the drug costs. So that's all prescriptions, retail, infusion, specialty, they're going to be 50%. They will continue to represent about half of all the new drugs approved by the FDA. So it's definitely where the world is going. There was a big discussion on pharmacy benefit managers, and I don't know if anybody saw the ABC story over the weekend that referenced pharmacy benefit managers. It was a story on
CVS.
yep, well I wasn't going to say their names, but large retail pharmacies, charging sometimes in some cases 3 times as much as if the patient would walk in and say, I want to pay cash. And of course, CVS and Walgreens are blaming it on the pharmacy benefit managers. And so what these companies do, so they're like Express Scripts, you may see them along 494, they're down kind of in the Bloomington area. So what they do is they negotiate the amount of money that insurance companies are going to pay the providers. So they're kind of middlemen, is the way I look at them. And I've always questioned how they've survived all of these years. They claim that they saved money. So I am not going to say any more than that. But really, there was a big discussion whether they're really going to start to go away. We're trying to control costs. People need to do things less expensively. They add this element of very ambiguous pricing methodologies. And this one example on ABC, a woman came in with a prescription and her insurance company said her copay was $292. If she would have said, I'm a cash paying patient, I don't have insurance, I believe it would have been $92. Susan saw this, that's why I'm looking at Susan. So, but then it's like, where does the fault, there's a perception from the patient, like the pharmacy should have told me that I would be better off by not using my insurance benefit, but the pharmacy is saying it's because of the pharmacy benefit manager. So they're kind of all pointing fingers and blaming each other. But it's that way in the specialty world as well. A lot of times these pharmacy benefit managers say that, well, this specialty drug has to go through CVS, Caremark, or Walgreens. That's where sometimes PHS gets pushed out of taking care of some of our patients. So just trying to be a little bit more competitive that way and know what the trends are. So that was on that. Kind of my miscellaneous takeaways from that discussion as well is, okay, so what can we do? What can PHS do to keep ourselves in there? And really, it all starts with the payer. So the gentleman, the program director at Fairview Home Infusion, he was brilliant. That's all I'm going to say. He was awesome. But he talked about the site of care optimization, which is what the payers are looking at. Where can I go to get the least expensive care, but still with those great outcomes? So what he talked about is targeting a set number of therapies. So don't go to an insurance company and say, I want to provide everything for all of your patients. Really limit it and say, we can provide subcutaneous immune globulins to your immune compromised patients. So really start with that small list of medications and patients. And then from a provider perspective, so from our provider status, what his suggestion was creating that small list of medications and who may benefit. Approach the payers, and if you can get buy-in from the payers, then go to your physician groups, go to your immunologist, your rheumatologist, anybody who might be providing or prescribing that therapy, and kind of outline, this is how we can make your life better. He called it the road show. He's like, you get your roadshow, you go in front of anybody you can get in front of, the payers, the physicians, their leadership. Now I think probably when you're Fairview Home Infusion, you have a bigger audience sometimes than what we maybe can get, but I thought it was still a great concept. But he talked about addressing the concerns that they may have. Physicians at the university might feel like, ooh, if we give it to somebody other than Fairview Home Infusion, I don't have access to the information because we don't share an electronic medical record. So kind of outline how you would communicate with that provider so that they don't lose track of that patient just because you're not part of their provider umbrella. He talked about infusion suites, which is something that I'm super excited about, and it's kind of that half step in between a patient going into a hospital, into like a short stay, and home. So maybe they're not quite sure, like, there's a high incidence of adverse events. So then detail, what are your emergency protocols? It talked about just really having a plan for everything so that they feel really comfortable giving you that therapy. Something that's gonna create a little buzz, mostly in the pharmacy world, but not just limited to the pharmacy world. You're gonna hear the word, the acronym USP 800. It was supposed to be in place this summer, It has been delayed because there's so much comment from us providers out there. So really by July 2018, that's the new deadline, we have to create a list. And so what we do is we look at the NIOSH list of anything that we're gonna be stocking in our pharmacy. So once we determine that list, then we have to go through a fairly significant process of, okay, how are we gonna handle this? What is the risk assessment? What protective equipment do our people need to be wearing when they're compounding it, receiving it, any part of that process. So you have to have standard operating procedures from receipt to disposal, and that's 12 steps. And then really implementing the training programs. It's not just pharmacy. It could be our warehouse receiving our McKesson order. It could be the drivers getting ready to take medications to the patient's home. It can be our home care nurses that they may be handling medications we're not even in control of, but it's on that NIOSH list. So making sure that they're safe as well. So it's kind of, it's the whole range at PHS. So there will be more to come. We are working with Jenny Butner in Human Resources too to make sure we're meeting some of those requirements.
So Jill, how many drugs do you think PHS will have on that list that you'll have to do that for?
Well, 10 to 12 that I would say at the most. I'm looking at like anticonvulsants. There's things that we don't stock that come from a retail pharmacy that are going to be on that list. So is my guess.
Okay, thanks.
And then probably one of my favorite sessions, so they have residents from all over the country, usually from a CVS or Walgreens, present on the new biosimilars, new drugs coming down the pipeline or just approved in 2017. So I chose 3 of them that you might hear just in our business. So it's not it's not an exhaustive list of all the new products, but just something you may hear from our patients. The first one we're actually already doing is Smoflipid, and this was new for us in our pharmacy in February of this year. So really it's a mixture of intralipids. Right now, up until now, I guess I should say, the lipid was soy-based. So this is actually soy, MCT, fish, and olive oil. So it's a combination of the 4. And really what they're seeing is these patients are having liver problems with TPN. They're actually seeing improvement in those liver function tests. So they're actually, they're able to have those calories. A lot of times we would have to back off on the lipids because their liver starts to show signs of dysfunction. But these are actually better tolerated. Here we mix them either in a dual chamber bag or as a separate infusion. So that's posed a little bit of a problem for some of our patients. All of a sudden they're connected to 2 infusion pumps. Also, you don't want those pumps to get confused and connected to the wrong thing because they run at very different rates. So we try and put everything all into one infusion if we can, but we really have to look at what does that patient get in that TPN before we decide how they're gonna get it here at PHS. Our policy is consistent with other providers. It has to be first dosed inpatient because patients can have an adverse event or allergy to the other parts, components, whether it be the olive oil or the MCT or the fish oils. And surprise, we started with 1 or 2 patients. We now have half of our patients getting Smoflipid. So we implemented several safety precautions because my technicians will tell you the product is made exactly in the same, it looks identical to the bag that the traditional lipids are made in. It's by the same company and they look identical. If they held them up, you wouldn't be able to tell from a distance. So we handle them very differently. We have 2 separate people drawing those up just to be safe for our patients. Children's has had several instances of kind of mixing the 2 up. So we don't want that to happen at PHS. Yeah.
I forget the other one that was the other lipid.
Omegavin?
Yeah.
Yep.
So how come, do you know why it seems like this one maybe, I've never heard of this, I've seen charting about it, but
Yep.
that didn't have to go through the same.
It did. The
research
company,
stuff?
Yep, the company chose not to pursue FDA approval for Omega-Ben because they knew they were coming out with the SMOF. And really with the SMOF lipids, because it's got the 4 different components, you don't get that fatty acid deficiency that was being seen in just the fish oil. So they never wanted FDA approval, so.
So who's keeping track, Jill, of the patient outcomes on this then?
Because it's FDA approved, there's really no requirement to report. I do think that's something that we could see at PHS maybe after we've seen it a year, like let's look at our patients. I think there's an opportunity for a poster or a presentation at NHIA. I listen to some of these presentations and I think to myself, okay, we could be giving these presentations because we have a lot of good data. I mean, half of our patients now have it. So it's definitely on my radar to say, I think we could publish something.
So we do the mixing here in our pharmacy,
Mhm.
and then where is the product sourced from? Like, where do these ingredients come from?
I can't, it's commercially available, so we just order it from one of our, it's kind of one of our wholesale sources,
Okay.
so.
Jill, have they noticed any other benefits besides the liver function?
They pretty much just talk about the improving free fatty acid panels and liver function. So as far as like if they're able to increase the dose, I haven't seen anything like that, but there's trials I'm sure going on now. It'll be fun to see after a year where we see some of our patients. Inflectra, I wish I could offer a little bit more information, but it's something, we do have a Remicade patient, so this is a biosimilar of Remicade. It is the first biosimilar monoclonal antibody in the United States and the second biosimilar in the United States. So it actually is on the market. It's not being fought in the court as of July, which I am surprised because what you'll know is most biosimilars are fought on the court level because the parent company, that first company to, like, so in this case, Remicade, they don't want to lose their patent rights. So they usually tie these up in the courts and it's not available. But because it's a biosimilar and not a generic, the providers actually have to say that you can use Inflectra. So I think there's a lot of providers that are still somewhat hesitant to do this. It has the same clinical indications as the Remicade except for pediatric ulcerative colitis, so that might limit our population a little bit too. With the pediatric, since Remicade does have that indication, they'd be more inclined to stay with Remicade. It is given every 8 weeks over not less than 2 hours, and it's about 25% less per vial than Remicade. So, a cost savings.
Was it found to not be helpful for pediatric ulcerative colitis, or
They
was
just,
it study?
they just didn't pursue the indication. They can be approved as a biosimilar much quicker if they leave some things off, yeah.
Hey Jill, for those of us who don't know what Remicade is, what's the indication use?
We usually use it like ulcerative colitis, rheumatoid arthritis, that kind of thing, autoimmune type stuff, yeah. So you're gonna see it from rheumatologists, GI providers, that kind of thing. So, and then the only one that I'm gonna mention, because this does affect such a small number of patients, Roy's probably heard of this one. So it's indicated for a very small subset of muscular dystrophy. Before you can even get this drug, you have to have the mutation, which only affects 5 in 1,000 of those patients. So very, very small number. I believe Gillette has used it in at least one patient, inpatient. I find it they got approval, but they have no shown clinical benefit. They do have ongoing trials, so we'll see what they kind of find from that, but no clinical benefit. It's thought to improve function in some of these patients, but it's just kind of we think this is gonna help type situation. Like I said, new trials going on right now. It is given as a 30 to 60 minute infusion every week in both pediatric and adult patients, which that means there's no maximum dose. As these kids and adults get bigger, their doses get bigger as well. And the annual cost is about $300,000 per patient. So that's why I find it very shocking that you
that there would be approval for this very small subset at a cost of approximately 300,000 patients with no shown clinical benefit.
Does insurance usually cover something like that? There's no clinical benefit? No.
I'm not sure. I know at Gillette, they've used it once.
Yeah, most of the time what we're seeing, at least in the home care market, is the payers are saying if it's not proven, that even if it's approved by the FDA, but not proven, it's considered experimental and they would not approve it.
Yep.
So,
I would be surprised.
Yes.
I don't know if this was the one, or am I thinking of the drug with SMA, for SMA?
You might be thinking that there's that one as well
This is
too.
the one, that the family bought it and did get approval, but that was an exception. But I don't think it was Duchenne musculosis or the others for
Yeah.
SMA.
Yeah, so I was surprised when trying to look at the studies. There's not much out there.
This is similar to some of the new drugs for cystic fibrosis, pindopioid mutation. Some of these drugs have been shown to have some efficacy, decline in lung function, and they're comparable costs, $100,000, $200,000 a year per patient. And they are generally covered. As long as you meet the guidelines, they usually have things like if the study was done in patients age 12 and over, the patient better be 12 or over, or the insurance company's not going to approve it because it was approved by the FDA for 12 and over, not under, so that kind of thing. But generally, they kind of do get, if you're shown benefit, I'm sure the Nurserin, which is the drug for spinal muscular atrophy, I'm sure that's being paid for by insurance companies because that's clearly been shown to be a benefit. You don't, but I think the important message is that you don't cure these kids with these treatments. So it's, you improve their quality of life, you may improve the quantity of their life, but these drugs are not curative at very high costs.
Correct. Yeah. So I thought that was an interesting one. And I think that's all I had.
Very interesting.
Any other questions?
Thank you for that.
So, I was at the same conference with Jill, and interesting that we're both doing pharmacy things. So I'm going to speak about antimicrobials. The speaker was a Dr. Shaw, and he was out of Boston, and he was really interesting as to where we're going with bacteria. Anyway, here is, you can pass this around. Just something I want you all just to kind of look at and kind of take it all in about how many microbes are on the planet as compared to people. Of course, they're overpowering us right now, it seems. So if you can just look through that. And then the bottom part is about a gentleman back in the 40s who was talking about bacteria and how they could eventually change and become something stronger than they were. I think it was like 1944, and it's Sir Alexander Fleming. It was in the Time magazine, so kind of interesting that he knew way before a lot of other people where this thing was going to go. In our culture, we use a lot of antibiotics, as we all know. And our arsenal of useful antibiotics is declining. Things that used to work don't work anymore because the bugs are getting stronger. And we're not making as many new drugs anymore. The new agents that are out there, this guy said that in 2014 there were basically just 4 new agents, and in 2013 there was just 1. He didn't have any other data, but he said it's a long process to come up with a new antibiotic that actually works and to get it approved and get it out there. So right now our arsenal is it's slim. Some kids are at the end of what can be used to successfully treat them, such as our CF kids, for instance, that are on antibiotics, a lot of antibiotics all the time. What states do you think have the highest amount of antibiotic use, would you say? Anybody have a thought on that?
Florida.
Close. It's the southern states. Florida not as bad, but the deep south, they have a lot of antibiotic use. And I think it's all due to education. The other states higher up, eastern coast and west coast, just the education level is higher, it seems, and also I think how people live in the south is quite different than we live. What do you think about Minnesota? What do you think? High use, low use, middle use? What do you think on the antibiotic scope? Middle? Actually, it's really low use compared to the rest of the country even. It's really, it's a white state compared to the black states down here. And they say that is due to, of course, our all the education here. And we have Mayo Clinic, not to say ring their chime, but we do have a good base of medical care here. So on that note, he also was talking about our hospital system, and I'm not sure, I was kind of wondering about this fact, but he said that 50% of antibiotic use in the hospital is inappropriate. Roy, what do you think about that? 50%, that's pretty high.
Actually, I just saw something somewhere where they reviewed antibiotics, and it's very high. It is across the board for both outpatients and inpatients.
But inappropriate use?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's, okay. So this guy is very, very worried about where we're going here. Very worried. He's kind of gloom and doom a little bit, but it makes you really think about what we're doing. Some of the illnesses that are not treated appropriately, that are given antibiotics out there, do you guys know of some that might be inappropriately treated? Just common things you would go into the... Strep, that's one. Yep. What about our children? What do parents take their kids? Ear infections is huge. A lot of those are viral. Mom wants an antibiotic, they give mom an antibiotic. It makes her feel better. Kid has all the side effects, but he'll eventually get better. They also said sinusitis is another one. Adults are guilty of that, I think. You go in, what do you want? You want somebody to make you feel better, so I want an antibiotic. So you get them. So education is the key piece to this whole thing, and I think as medical people, we could be educating our families a little more on that note. We do have a great immune system in our bodies that take care of a lot of things over time. And then he talked about just our American culture here in North America, about our quick fix. We want a quick fix for everything. We want a quick fix for our car, and for this, and for our bodies. So we seek out somebody that's going to give us that quick fix. Also consider, the fact that we use a lot of antibiotics in our cells, but there's also a lot of antibiotic usage in our animals that provide our food, and also in our agriculture system. So there's antibiotics everywhere. Everybody uses them. WHO, the World Health Organization, now here's some really huge statistics too that were like, wow. By 2050, and I know 2050 is a long time away, but 2050, they said Asia and Africa, each of them will have over 4 million deaths due to overuse of, resistance in the antibiotic usage over there. That's a lot of people. In North America, it's only 317,000 compared to the 4 million. And those underdeveloped countries, I guess I could see that coming down the pike, I suppose. Again, education, how they live, just the number of people, and the numbers are growing quickly over there. You will see an increase of multi-drug resistant organisms, and I think we're seeing them out there. Jill's shaking her head, yep. And some of the big ones that he talked about was E. coli. There's some new acronyms. ESBL, I'm sure Jill knows this one, extended spectrum beta-lactamase organisms, and Neisseria gonorrhea. Those are the ones on the incline right now. So the CDC is the one that monitors all of this, and they have 3 levels of hazard as far as microorganisms go. The first one is an urgent, a hazard that's urgent. It has high consequence to lives, and it's very antibiotic resistant threat. This requires urgent public health attention, and on their list for this was CRE, which is carbapenem resistant Enterobacter, and that I think we've been seeing that in some of our kids. If you read through their stuff, you'll see that CRE occasionally in there. C. diff is another, and drug-resistant Neisseria gonorrhea, again, was on an urgent level for them. Serious, the second level for the CDC, was significant antibiotic resistant, just significant. And that just requires public health monitoring, and that's a lot of the things that we're seeing. The MRSA, the VRE, the ESBLS, all these acronyms, and like drug-resistant strep. And there's many more that we treat that are just in that serious category. And then, lastly, there is the third category, which is just concerning. And there's low antibiotic resistance and or multiple therapeutic options, so it's not as concerning. And that is the clindamycin-resistant group B strep, VRSA, which is vancomycin-resistant strep aureus, and the erythromycin-resistant group A strep. Those are the concerning for them. So how does this all happen, all these resistant bugs and the antibiotics that aren't covering them? And he went through the big microbiology with the cell and all the business. But he says that way back, the organisms all have a natural resistance to what naturally comes their way. But with the introduction of antibiotics, they have an acquired resistance now, the bacteria. And that they can actually have a transfer of genetic material from cell to cell, which is very concerning with what we do with the antibiotic resistance. They also can exchange genetic material, and all this exchange is called a horizontal evolution of the cell. And of course, he went into it much more deeply, but basically that's what's going on. There's an acquisition of new resistant genetic material from one organism to another. And the part that really, I sat up in my chair going, oh, I never thought about this, but he said that not only is it between the same species of organisms, but it can be between different species of organisms. So he quoted a study, and they actually saw this happening under an electron microscope, that how do I say it? The VRSA organism got some genetic material from the VRE organism, and you could actually see it happening under the microscope. So it's not the same organism passing it to the same organism, but different organisms passing it along, which makes superbugs. So how do the antibiotics work in this whole thing? And again, it's a very complicated, some of the antibiotics, it's very complicated how they work. But basically, a lot of them work on the cell wall permeability, so they can get in there and kill that bacteria. Also inactivating some of the enzymes in some of the bacteria, and also inhibiting the DNA and RNA sometimes. So bacteria, the antibiotics work on the bacteria in many ways, and those smart microbiologists are out there trying to figure out how to do this. But it's really a long, involved process. There's some big organisms. The biggest one I heard of that I had is the KPC. It's a gram-negative organism. It's Klebsiella pneumoniae carbapenes. That's the big one coming down the pike that everybody's worried about. So what are we doing about this in our world? Well, we are educating the public, people like us. We're educating our patients, families, and doctors, I think, are starting to educate their patients, like, you don't need that antibiotic. Give it 5 days and see if it'll go away or get better, and come back if you still have a fever or whatever, give you the instructions. And also hospitals and some organizations are doing the Antimicrobial Stewardship Program, the ASP. Roy, do you know if Children's has that?
You know, I'm sure they do because they, I remember like, they used to review our blood transfusion and let us know if they inappropriately prescribing blood transfusions.
Oh.
I'm sure they do the same thing with antibiotics.
They have a pharmacist.
They have a pharmacist. So it's kind of a governing thing that kind of tells doctors what to do a little bit, like how to treat the infections. Like, first of all, they want you to find out what it is, unless it's life-threatening. Like, let's do some cultures to find out what it is. Let's just not put them on something. And then they have a list of antibiotics for that organism and for them to choose. And they also they kind of direct them as to how to do the course of antibiotics. Like, sometimes you can use a combination therapy, like 2 at a time. Sometimes you can give a course and then of this one and then go to this one. They also recommend when it's time to go from IV antibiotics to oral antibiotics. And it's just a lot of direction. And as you know, whoops, there we go.
There's no movement.
Yeah, I'm not moving. Doctors sometimes don't appreciate that very much, so there's kind of a conflict as to why are we following this, we know what we're doing kind of thing. But a lot of facilities are really, really, really encouraging that. And then he ended the whole thing after talking about that. He ended it with, he thinks the weak link in our bacteria, especially here in the United States, and how it's becoming superbugs, is the nursing homes. He thinks that those patients kind of you have a UTI, oh, here, I'll give you this. They don't culture it, they just to kind of mitigate the symptoms and make the person feel better. They don't really, they don't have this antimicrobial stewardship thing going on, so they just kind of treat them as they will. And again, they're old people and nobody's looking out for their well-being a lot of times, so sometimes they just say, here, have some Bactrim or have this. And so that's what he thinks that all nursing homes that care for the aged should have this stewardship, and he's hoping that's where it's going to go. So something to think about, something that we can do. We can educate our families and educate ourselves and not seek out those antibiotics. It's kind of a scary thing where this is going to go. Questions?
Lynn, what was his name, the person that presented?
Let me go here. Eric Kahana Shah. Jill, do you want to add anything? Yeah, you should have been in that one. You probably would have had a lot of questions for him.
And it's not just about creating superbugs. I mean, it's the cost of healthcare system is immense. Less inexpensive drugs, but it's still, when you add up, if 40% of prescriptions are unnecessary, it's a lot of money.
A lot of money.
I think Zithromax, I think, is the most commonly prescribed antibiotic.
It is. Just give me a Z-Pack, you'll hear people say, that's all I want.
I mean, isn't it just, it's convenient because it's 5 days? And
Yep.
wasn't there some challenge?
Yeah, it's 5 days, it's broad spectrum, it's pretty well tolerated by people, you get a little bit of stomach distress, but otherwise it's pretty well tolerated, it's once a day, so compliance is good,
that was it kind of more focused on marketing versus effectiveness? That's what I've heard.
Did he elaborate any on prophylactic use for, say, for example, our primary ciliary dyskinesia or our CF patients when they're using prophylactic antibiotics? Did he elaborate any on that use? Or was it most on misdiagnosis?
He elaborated just a little bit. He's not really for prophylactic antibiotics much. But he just hinted at it, didn't go into it a lot.
The prophylactic studies are pretty well documented. The patients have preservation of lung function and better quality of life. So that's the risk of doing it. If you're the patient and it's going to extend your life by 3 years, you're not going to argue, right?
Right. I just wonder if in general or if it escalates our issues with superbugs by treating prophylactic. I mean, I understand why you would.
You know, it's so interesting.
In general, it makes it worse.
Well, it does, because in the studies in CF patients that go on prophylaxis, they do end up with Pseudomonas that ends up being resistant to things over time. So it's a price to pay.
I think, you know, we see a lot of our kiddos that are with the chronic things down at the end of the road with antibiotics. And then what? Where do you go? Anything else? Any other questions? Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Oh, there's no question.